Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining today's SCOMathon webinar, where we're going to be talking about the SCCM Community Management Pack and going a little bit deeper than you might have seen earlier on in the year when this management pack was showcased. But before we get into this awesome topic, please do join us on Slack if you have any questions throughout today's webinar. Or of course, after the webinar is finished, Slack is the place to go. If you go to scomathon.com/Slack, you can join in on the conversation there. So without further ado, let's get going by introducing myself. So I'm Bruce Cullen, I'm the Director of Products at Cookdown, and it's with great pleasure I host today's webinar. And with me, I have the one, the only, Dujon Walsham. Dujon, hello.
Hey, hello.
Great to have you with us. You're a multi-time SCOMathon speaker, among many other things, such as being an MVP, being a founder and chief Microsoft technologist at Protect.org, and just being an all-round awesome guy. It's great to have you with us.
Oh, I don't know how to top that introduction, but yeah, thank you very much.
I did a good job, I can tell. That's good. Well, let's get into it then, I guess. Let's start by, I think a good place to start really is looking at the existing Microsoft SCCM MP, because obviously that exists already. It's been around for a very long time, and you know, let's see what it can do, what it can't do, what its deficiencies are to set the stage, really. So really, the existing SCCM MP is a really good sort of starting point. It's really good for discovering the architecture of SCCM and all the roles that make it up, which is obviously an important sort of building block for layering your monitoring on top of. But really, it only gives you the basics. It gives you alerts when roles become unhealthy, which are obviously important. And those alert notifications from SCCM get pulled into SCOM. And that's primarily kind of what it does, relatively kind of simple. So what's the issue with this? Well, the big one is it was made quite a long time ago now, 10 years ago. It has feature gaps. It was made for SCCM 2012. And of course, there is a big support issue as well, that it is no longer supported from what I can tell. And in reality, it's little more than a forwarder for SCCM. SCCM itself actually generates the alerts. They're forwarded onto SCOM, so they can be sort of handled and managed with the rest of your SCOM alerts, but little additional information is kind of provided. They're rule-based alerts. So in other words, because they're not monitors, they don't close when stuff goes kind of green again, which leaves you with some work, unnecessary work to do. And as far as its coverage is concerned, it's really based around registry-based issues, so it isn't comprehensive monitoring. And a big point from when Dujon and I were talking about this kind of on the run-up to this webinar is it will tell you something went wrong, but it won't tell you what went wrong or how you go about fixing it. There are no sort of clues in there. So you're left to figure it out and spend a large amount of time essentially Googling it. And the final thing I could see that was wrong with the old SCCM MPs is this. I went to find the download link and it looks like it's been pulled by Microsoft. So it's actually no longer possible to get hold of it. I mean, Dujon, what do you think? It seems like a pretty fundamental issue to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely starting the fact that you can't actually get the management pack again. That's definitely one thing. But yeah, I definitely think the actual gap between the SCCM management pack that came out for the supported version then, and as to now, is definitely quite a big gap there. So it definitely does do a lot in the accommodation of sort of looking at the architecture of SCCM and how everything is structured in that sense. But because there's so many different new features, best practices, different new roles, roles that have been depreciated over the years, it doesn't necessarily reflect how it necessarily should be now. And then not to mention a lot of the alerts and the monitors that you get in the management pack as well. So there is sort of an issue where you will get a notification to say, well, something is wrong with a certain site component role, but then you won't necessarily know exactly what it is until you actually jump onto the SCCM console. And then with how they actually get that information, it can sort of be between sort of some of the event logs, and then also around the registry as well, where it can also state its actual health state as well. So you get a good sort of all-round notification that something is wrong, but sometimes it might not always be the case. Sometimes it might be a false positive. Sometimes by the time you get to that console, it will already come back as healthy anyway. In even some cases, it may even be healthy, even though you actually get a notification in the manager pack that it is not healthy.
The annoying thing about rule-based alerts, if it was unhealthy for like 0.2 of a second, you're going to get an alert.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think it's clear to see that there are a number of issues, a number of flaws in the old Microsoft monitoring provided for SCCM. Not surprising given it's 10 years old. So there are some work for you there, Dion. So how is your MP different?
Well, one of the very first things I wanted to do, and I think probably the one that was screaming out the most, was definitely to bring it up to date. So having a management pack that can actually recognize sort of the current branch versions and all of the different uh, endpoint manager releases, that was definitely very important to accommodate as well. So the first part is more around sort of the versioning, so recognizing versions all the way up to 2207 and then going all the way down to 2012 as well. But of course, if you are running in 2012, then that manager pack would probably be screaming with a lot of alerts. But that's another story. So more comprehensive monitoring is another thing I wanted to break in. So this is where I guess the management pack, the older version, does actually make a lot of sense in how it's structured, because we have to sort of take into consideration that the SCCM technology is a very, very big technology. So to cover a lot of the notifications to say that something is wrong, whilst it might be quite generic, it does make a lot of sense, because to have more comprehensive and more specific alerting is no easy task, and developing this management pack definitely reveals that a lot more. So to have something more clear and concise to say what is actually wrong is quite tricky to do, considering the amount of roles and amount of features and the multiple ways that SCCM can be leveraged. So it does make sense why the old management pack is like the way it is. But one thing we wanted to do is actually at least attack a lot of the areas in which we actually want to know. So a lot of the areas in SCCM we might use very specifically, and we just want to know specifically what's wrong with those roles, and that will make things a lot easier going forward as well. So another area we wanted to look at as well is how do we actually interrogate those areas and see what is actually going wrong. So we've got one of the first things I've added in the management pack is a feature where we can actually create a new event log, which is called the endpoint manager log. The management pack is then able to interrogate SCCM and look in various other areas, and then basically create new event logs as well. So there's a way of sort of keeping the data retention of certain events in SCCM and the history, and as well as being able to monitor on that as well. You've got the log file parsing, because SCCM has a lot of logs, and we are talking for clients, and we are also talking for servers as well. And a lot of the log files really contain a lot of the meat and potatoes when it comes to a lot of the information of whether something is actually healthy or not. So that's one area that definitely has been incorporated in this management pack as well. Also things like the SDK, which would be by WMI, and also the PowerShell module that you get as well from SCCM as well. So there are many areas that we can actually look at to really find out whether SCCM is actually in a healthy state or not, and this management pack helps to accommodate those areas to sort of build more around the comprehensive monitoring. And that's how this management pack differs a little bit different than the version that we are currently used to at the moment.
To be honest, it's such a large undertaking building a management pack for something like this. And anyone out there that's trying to build custom monitoring for anything with SCOM will be able to appreciate this, but SCCM, to go deep with SCCM, it's such a large system. You know, I'm genuinely surprised this is a community thing that we're talking about. We're not talking about a paid for product. So that's awesome in itself.
Yeah. And yeah, then so we've got meaningful alerts. So yeah, just to sort of reiterate again, this is more going into understanding exactly what is wrong with certain parts of SCCM. So for example, if we had issues with, let's say, a management point and clients couldn't talk to it, that's one of the things you'd want to know straight off the rip. And in the old management pack, you might get a notification that says, well, this particular site component role might be in having an issue, or something might be wrong with the management point. Now, we could probably think that there might be a client communication issue, but we don't necessarily know that for sure until we jump on SCCM. So it's good to actually have something that actually says, well, there is something absolutely wrong with this. Have a look, check it out. And that's
Mm.
kind of more the basis around the meaningful alerts. It's just to sort of understand, like, basically, don't bother me until something actually is wrong.
And then make sure that when you tell me about it, that I can take immediate action without having to hit Google and figure out what exactly is going on myself and poking around in the innards of SCCM. Makes total sense.
Absolutely. And then like for monitoring for suboptimal config. So yeah, another part I wanted to add to this management pack was sort of around best practices as well, because depending on how we use SCCM, I think a lot of us generally would use things for around things like asset management and managing devices and vice versa. And so when it comes to best practices, there might be ways that you might be running SCCM in which can sort of de-optimize, so to speak, in terms of how your configuration is done. So best practices that might say, well, you're running an older version, or certain options or features are enabled which shouldn't, or certain roles exist even though they've been depreciated in different versions or older versions of SCCM as well, and especially sort of around sort of the device estate as well, because sometimes we can run a lot of things around sort of reports that can consist around asset management, patching, whether devices or online, or whether they even generally exist for that matter as well. So I wanted to accommodate sort of that area, and at least sort of talk about information that we want to know, especially where it could have an impact on results, and especially on any type of reporting on any data that you may sort of show around to display anything around sort of the managed devices within SCCM as well. So best practices was a sort of a good little feature to sit on top to sort of really have a full, better picture of what is actually going on with your environment.
Sounds good. It makes a lot of sense, especially when we're talking about things like old versions, where we're not just talking about best practice, we're talking about support essentially, and that is important, because if you're running an unsupported config, if you have got an issue with their CCM, Microsoft or whoever it is isn't going to want to know. That's
Absolutely.
important stuff. And this final point, I think, is from my perspective really, really valuable, which is that the management pack is being actively developed. So if there are issues, they'll actually get addressed, as opposed to not actively addressed. And Dion, I know from previous discussions you're actively listening and taking in feedback from the community. So if people out there have issues when giving it a go, Dion is responsive from what I've seen anyway, and will incorporate your feedback and issues, which is really, really important.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And yeah, as you said, the mantra pack is actively being developed as well. And the response from the community has been great, especially when it comes to little things like bugs and different areas that can sort of be developed, and more different types of monitoring that could be added as well. And for the fact that the manager pack is being actively developed, it fits very well with trying to make more comprehensive monitoring as well, because
Mm.
with the many different areas in how SCCM can be used, as well as the different roles that exist there as well, there's so much to add there as well. And basically, it's a very interesting task to try and accommodate and cover every single area. So it definitely does help when the community gets involved and they sort of give
Mm.
me little things about certain bugs that happen as well, because that obviously helps the management pack become a lot stronger, especially when more people download it as well, and then also cover any existing bugs which may exist in their environment as well as mine as well. So yeah, it's definitely a great thing to sort of have a community where we can all sort of I guess look to sort of build the management pack and the build monitoring that we all actually want to see, and that can come across different types of scenarios as well. So yeah, it's definitely a good thing at the moment.
Mutually beneficial is how I'd describe that.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that's kind of worth saying, I kind of said it at the top a little bit here, is that this isn't the first time we've talked about this MP here at SCOMathon. We sort of debuted it, I guess, at SCOMathon 3 months ago, back in May. But obviously that's a 16-hour sort of event, so it's quite easy for a single thing to get lost in all the other webinars. And in this webinar, 3 months ago, Dion set out the kind of foundations, what the MP does, what the MP doesn't do, that kind of thing. So we're not going to cover everything in all the details in slides. You'll be probably pleased to hear, but we are going to see demo. We're also going to cover what's new, what's changed in the last 3 months, just to reiterate that point around active development. But it is worth checking out this YouTube video. I will stick all the links in Slack and in the chat as we go on. So that's important to note. So what's new then?
Right, so we've got some sort of new features added in this version of the management pack, which will be available very soon. And it was just to really extend more around the new versions that we are accommodating and sort of covering the sort of current branch side of things. So one of the things that I wanted to add in there, just to sort of add a little bit more to the recognizing of the latest versions of SCCM, was one of the things like end of life tracking. So when it comes to the versions of SCCM which we use, you may get a notification in the console and different other areas to say, well, this particular version that you're using is not supported, but then you might not necessarily know that unless you actually go into that console or on that particular server. So what I wanted to do was sort of centralize that monitoring and have a way of actually stating that this particular version is not in support, and then it will also tell you the actual date that it's actually meant to be in support for. So if it's gone over that particular date, then you will get an alert notification to say that as well. But of course, if everything's healthy, then you can also track that as well, and that will also tell you the end of life version as well. So it's sort of a good way to sort of bring that in so that you don't necessarily have to search through different areas of Microsoft documentation or having to sort of look through different areas. So everything will be sort of right there, so you can see that whether your version is actually in date or not. So that's one area that I wanted to bring in terms of the new features of the slightly new version of the management pack that I've got coming out very soon.
Sounds good to me. Sounds important.
Now this one is actually quite interesting because with as of lately, I have been doing a lot of upgrades of older versions of SCCM to newer versions as well. And one of the things that take into account is definitely around the ADK. And with some of the very old versions of ADKs I've seen, they have to be upgraded as well. So I sort of threw this in there as well because this is something I actually wanted to see as well, as it would save definitely a lot of time in a lot of interrogation. So there's actually two monitors to this. So the first one will actually interrogate the current ADK version that you're using, and it will also check the WinPE version of the ADK as well and actually do a comparison between them, because you have to have both of them on the same version. And if you don't have them on the same version, then you can have a lot of issues, especially when you use the OSD side of SCCM. So create things like boot images and sort of task sequences and anything around that area definitely can be impacted if you don't actually have those two matching. So that's one side of the actual monitoring. And then the other side is also checking the ADK version and then comparing it to the version of SCCM. And there are a lot of Microsoft documentation which exists that actually tells you which ADK version you should be using with your SCCM environment. So it will do a comparison between them, and if it finds that that version is not on that at least minimum version or recommended version, then you will get an alert notification to actually state that this ADK version is older than the version you should be using for your SCCM, and that you will need to upgrade that. So that's another part I wanted to bring as well. So that's 2 monitors in this particular section here.
Sounds like a big time saver to me.
And then this one I threw in here as well. I think this probably maybe falls, well, I would say, yeah, a best practice area, but I would say this is more of a best practice, and this is definitely something that everyone should actually look to do as well if this type of scenario does exist. So this is around the actual console version. So once you've actually upgraded your version of SCCM, depending on the type of upgrade, you would need to upgrade your SCCM console as well, and not doing so can definitely possibly cause data corruption issues or data being shown in your SCCM which may not necessarily be correct. So one of the parts of the monitoring I wanted to add was to actually check the actual console version and then check the SCCM version as well, and then see if those match. So that's pretty much how that particular monitor works. And with all the other new monitors, so it all sort of helps to complement the whole bringing the management pack into the nowadays as well. So we wanted to cover everything from recognizing the latest versions, but then also understanding whether your versions are up to date, and if you've got different versions pending, and then also if your console and your ADK versions all gelling all together. So yeah, that pretty much is everything that exists in terms of the new features to accommodate the new version of that management pack.
Perfect. Some great new features there. I think that's a great point for me to make you presenter and for you to show us all the cool stuff yourself. We'll cover all the things that exist in there rather than just covering the new things at this stage too. So hopefully, Dion, you can share your screen and we can see it in action.
Right, okay, right. So let's go and let's start with the let's start with the with the SCOM console, right? So, right, we've got a slightly healthy-ish lab here. Right, so we'll go into the management pack we've got here. So if we go into the open alert, so just for example, so for one of the new features that I covered, so we've got this one, for example, the ADK and WinPE versions are not matching. So we can see here that the primary site server has an issue with an ADK and the WinPE versions matching there. So I've got an ADK version here, and the ADK version does not match the WinPE version, which even actually surprised me actually building this monitor. I actually thought this would come healthy, but there you go. Yeah, so that's one new feature there. And then we've also got some alerts here which sort of cover the best practice. So we'll go into sort of how some of these alerts and monitors actually go into some of the areas in which we can interrogate for more precise monitoring. So this one just covers that site failover isn't configured in SCCM. This is for more things like passive site servers, and if you have more of a single point of failure. Then we've got another monitor here. This one actually covers that new versions of SCCM are actually available. So if you are actually running an older version, then it will actually show you different versions that are available, which can actually help you upgrade it to more of the later version as well. If we have a look, we've got a sort of a generic list of all of the different SCCM roles as well. And then we've also got the older version of the SCCM management pack as well, just to sort of give just a little bit of an idea on sort of the slides that we discussed previously. So if I go to active alerts, for example, so here, I've got a list here of config manager server component issues. So some of these can be around sort of the state system, or some of them around the management point, notification points. So there's a lot of alerts here, and some of these are actually brand new. So these are sort of real alerts that I didn't actually create myself to prove a point. So like these exist here. So if I minimize that and then I go right into the SCCM server, so just for example's sake, so we go to site status, we've got the component site status. So you can see here, everything, well, with the exception of those two, everything is pretty much healthy on this side. So once I see an alert on the SCOM console, I would naturally have to jump all the way here. So this is where we go back into the SCOM console, and then we have a look at these alerts. So then this management pack for me is able to sort of have a more clear, concise way of actually telling me what the actual health state of the SCCM server is doing. So in this case, for example, I've got one for offline devices. So this is actually showing me a device that actually has not been offline for a while. It is showing me the current SCCM server, which makes sense because the lab has been off for a little while as well. But it will give you a list of all of the devices which actually have not checked in for quite a long time. And then if we go into the servers and I pull out the Health Explorer, for example, so this will just show you just an idea of some of the information that we get from some of the state changes. So if I have a look at the WinPE version, for example, we can see the friendly names of the WinPE version that's being used, the ADK version being used, as well as the actual version numbers as well. We've also got things like the end of life monitor that we discussed as well. So if I go here, we can actually see that we've got the version name, which I'm running Configuration Manager 2111. And then we've also got the end of life date that's specified here as well. So I am still within the time period as well, though this will actually be upgraded at some point later as well. So that's that particular area. We've got the wrong ADK version here as well. So we can actually see that I'm running a version higher than the required version. So that's actually running fine for me as well. We've also got the console version checker monitor as well. Yep, so they are matching and they are fine as well. So I guess another thing what I can do is sort of give an overview on a lot of the monitors which are in this actual management pack, just to sort of give an idea on how they are actually constructed. So I guess some good points would be, like, let's say the management point, for example. So the management point, as well as the software update point server. So those two particular server points have a lot of interesting log files, but a lot of their log files really contain a lot of the information that we really want to know. So one of the things that the management point has is around the HTTPS status, whether that's actually active or not. So they depend on sort of the log files. So those two monitors, for example, go through the log files that interrogate that and actually have a look at the last failed message and the last successful message, and they'll be able to sort of compare to each other and then see exactly where the state is on the management point. And that's a very important part when it comes to knowing the actual true health state of that particular area. Again, same thing for the software update point server. So when we take into consideration things like patch management, patch Tuesdays, any kind of patching, especially when we use things like automatic deployment rules as well. One thing we want to know is if the actual software update point synchronization has actually ran successfully. Now, it's interesting because this area you can actually find it very easily, but then at the same time, if you actually try to sort of see a lot of the health states on the software update point, it is kind of tricky because you've got the synchronization, which then goes through the WSUS and then for the software update point. But you have to take into consideration as well that the software update point, once it goes for the synchronization, it then has to go through the actual catalog upgrading as well to actually pull all of those updates into SCCM as well. So this particular monitor also goes through the log file interrogation as well to actually have a look through to see whether the software update point synchronization as actually ran. So those sort of two monitors sort of depend on more sort of the log file interrogation. And then we go to some of the primary site server monitors. So a lot of these would be in the primary site, you've got the PowerShell module but you've also got a lot of the WMI classes as well, which can go more further into the sort of the SDK side. So that's how a lot of these monitors are then structured on these points as well. So a lot of the things around the ADK, things around best practices, whether you have collections that are using the all systems limiting collection, for example. So if you do have that, then potentially updating any memberships and collections can actually cause a lot of lag and a lot of issues there. So that's sort of an area on the sort of the best practice side as well. Also, if we go to, let's say, for example, the distribution point. So the distribution point, so it's got some very interesting monitors in here, but more specifically, they are more around the rules side. So if we just go all the way down to the bottom, endpoint distribution point, let me just minimize a lot of these. So the endpoint distribution point, for example, has a couple of rules here, and those rules are more around whether certain packages have actually been deployed around successfully or not. And with a lot of packages, you have a lot of reference points and also as well as a lot of dependencies as well. For example, if some packages have not been distributed successfully, then you can actually see some issues in the task sequences as well. So what I wanted to do was have an area in which we can actually have that part looked into more, and that depends on, let me just switch over, there is a feature in the management pack which actually creates for you, for example, an event log. So this event log here, it will be the endpoint manager event log. So at the moment, this one is more around sort of alerts that contain warnings for the site failover not enabled, which is a monitor, well, it's a rule that we actually have. But in this area as well, this is a centralized point where we can actually have a lot of different kinds of notifications which have a good data retention to keep any sort of issues that happen in SCCM logged in here as well, so that it's easier to sort of pass through to the SCOM console, so you can actually see what is actually wrong with SCCM as well. So with this management point, you've got sort of a lot of the areas accommodated for. So those being areas of the log files, for example, and then you've got the PowerShell, the SDK, and you've also got the event log files as well. And then just sort of having sort of another look at these areas. So yeah, you can understand where the complexity of how SCCM is structured. There are a lot of roles. So when you do actually have notifications that are sort of like this, whilst they are generic, it does sort of make sense because of the fact of having more clear and comprehensive monitoring for each individual point is a very, very long task. And I couldn't necessarily count how many different types of issues you could see on different roles, and that's depending on whether those roles are actually enabled or not. So that's definitely a thing to actually take into consideration as well. But also, because if you actually have a look at some of the roles that are accommodated in SCCM 2012. So for example, if you had a, let's say, a CAS server, for example, or you had roles like the asset intelligence points, for example, see a lot of these roles are actually depreciated in a lot of the versions that we are using now. So if we actually look at some of the views, for example, a lot of the views in the old management pack would contain those particular servers like the CAS servers and asset intelligence server roles because they have these classes already defined. In this management pack, for example, it actually doesn't accommodate looking at sort of CAS server roles and as well as sort of asset intelligence roles. And other things like application catalog roles as well, which aren't necessarily accommodated for and depreciated in different areas. But that is a area which I will sort of look to add into this management pack in the much more bigger major update for this manager pack as well. So at least it recognizes that you've got older components which do have to be sort of downgraded or removed from your environment for example's sake as well. And other areas that I try to enrich in this management pack as well, for example, are some of the properties, for example. So with this distribution point here, we can see the actual management point that it's related to. We can see the type of distribution point it is, so it's Pixie enabled, but if it was SCCM Pixie enabled, we'd be able to see if that's the case as well. We can see if this distribution point is an internet only one as well. In this case it is not, but we've got more sort of enriched information where we can actually see more of the configuration in a lot of our roles as well. So instead of going through the SCCM console and having a look through a lot of the settings and properties that way, what I try to do is sort of centralize a lot of them here as well. And then, for example, the manager point as well. So for example, another thing is around the communications for management points. So eventually at some point, they would look as a best practice to have something like a enhanced HTTP or secure HTTPS communications, for example, as well. So that's another area that could be sort of looked at to be enriched as well. But at this point, we can see that it's not running SSL, and it is a default management point as well. And then I guess to perhaps top it off is the details for the primary site, for example. So with keeping up to the point of recognizing a lot of the later versions of SCCM and the current versions as well. So we've got not only the actual build version, but we've also got the recognized friendly name version as well. So with just knowing the build version, we also know the full version name as well. And also other areas like the failover server side, for example, we had the alert, for example, that actually says that the site failover is not configured. So if this was actually configured, then not only would you not get that alert, but then, for example, you would also get the actual server name of the failover server as well, just to indicate that your SCCM environment does have redundancy and it doesn't have a single point of failure as well. Another part in terms of accommodating a lot of the later versions of the current SCCM versions that we have, we also have some monitoring for the data warehouse point servers as well, for those that do use the data warehouse server role for different data retention and reporting on more historical things around asset management and different deployment and patching statistics as well. So we've also got parts of enriched properties here where we've got the SQL server in which the data warehouse point is on, and the names of the database as well. At the moment, this is really monitoring more around the data warehouse monitor at the moment, which we've got right here. So a thing similar with this management pack and the older version as well is that it does accommodate for the general services that you would get with SCCM as well. So at this point, I think this management pack does have a little bit to go in order to, I guess, fully take over the older version of the management pack, and that will come with more implementations of monitoring and sort of addressing more of the comprehensive detail. And once it actually gets to that point, then we would actually be in the position where this management pack would probably be the full and only version of a management pack you would need in order to understand your SCCM environment. So at the moment, it accommodates for a lot of the current versions, best practices, and the generalization of a lot of the base SCCM services that SCCM comes with as well. So we've got a lot of the foundation where you've got things like many different endpoints and where you can actually find out how healthy SCCM is, or is SCCM actually healthy or not? And yeah, so at the moment, if you do have the older version, then you probably still could keep that version as well as running this management pack as well. But I would say when we actually get to the more major update of this management pack, which will be I would say at some point at the near the end of this year, then this management pack would definitely be at a point where it could actually fully take over and give a fully comprehensive and real state of how healthy your actual SCCM server and SCCM environment is. But yeah, that's pretty much the demo of the management pack and the alerts and kind of the structure of how it's actually moving at the moment.
Oh, really good to see. Thank you for sharing us. There's a lot in there. I know you pointed out some things that are still on the to-do list, but as you say, if you use this management pack in conjunction with the existing one, you get the best of both, and they can coexist. So that's great to see. All right, let me take back presenter just for a final few slides, and then we will wrap up. So first thing to say is obviously the download link is kind of important. I put it in the chat, I put it on Slack as well. So do go and check out the management pack from Protect.org. And of course, the original webinar in which Dion showed off and went through the details of the features, linked to that webinar there as well. So do go and check it out. And without further ado, it is time for Q&A. So are there any questions from anyone? If you do have questions, please put them in the GoToWebinar chat. And of course, on Slack, I am watching for both places. Let's see if there are any questions. And while we do that, while we're waiting to see if there are any questions, who are Protect.org? Let's find that out.
Well, um, let's see how to sort of describe who a Protector. Well, I would say Protector. I guess we look to accomplish the simplicity in security overall, really. So I guess it's we find more of sort of the balance of sort of the convenience and the simplicity all around things like around security, and I guess that's pretty much how Protect.org is driven. So Protect.org, we try to sort of have a self-explanatory name on sort of protecting an organization, and that's really sort of the DNA that Protect.org really move with, and with a lot of the sort of solutions that we have, which you will definitely see in the future. We definitely try to sort of address that. So, and I guess things like the sort of this management pack, for example, I guess plays sort of a good part in sort of trying to sort of add simplicity and sort of in richness as well, and that's what we really try to sort of put forward in the overall message. Like just for example, the Impact Creator application, for example. So that was sort of developed to sort of have the sort of simplicity around sort of developing management packs as well for SCOM as well, and having sort of a more better control over sort of your overall monitoring, but also sort of bridging the gap where a sort of a novice user and an advanced user can sort of both sort of relate to each other and be able to sort of develop something there. So yeah, that's pretty much, I would say, the sort of DNA and structure of Protect.org.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. I realized I should have done that before and stuck it in the slides, but there we go. Let's see, there are some questions coming in, so we'll go through those quickly now. The first question is, are the version checks and comparisons implemented into the management pack, or do you need some kind of internet access to get live data?
No, so they're actually built in and integrated into the management pack. And the reason why I did that is because I would probably say in real life scenarios, a lot of the environments that I've ever come across when it came to SCOM always tend to be locked down from the internet. I mean, there are some, and then there are features in SCOM where you can actually click on management packs and then you can download them directly. But because of how comprehensive a lot of the SCCM versions are when it comes to sort of the build versions, the names of the versions, and then we've got the consoles, agents, and different areas. I thought it was better for the management pack to sort of keep more of an internal uh, information of those versions. So it's actually a lot easier and a lot quicker to be able to identify the build name versions and the actual friendly names. But yeah, everything is all built in within a management pack in terms of the versioning.
Sounds good. And then sort of part two of that question is, presumably this means that the MP, when it gets updated, that versioning information is kept up to date.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. So the recent update of this management pack was to accommodate recognizing 2207. So yeah, anytime the new versions of SCCM do come out, when the management pack is updated, it will be kept up to date with that as well. Yes.
Sounds good. Okay, next question. If we are standing up a new SCOM 2022 management group, do we still need to import the original SCCM MP alongside your one? Or will we get enough basic alerting with just your one, the new one?
So there's no dependency on the older version of SCCM as such, but so you can actually just use my management pack. In terms of whether it would actually give you the sort of right level of basic information, I would say, I would say, I would say yes, because the management pack that I've got, I guess, addresses best practices that would be relatable to any version of SCCM. And a lot of the sort of the comprehensive monitors that I do have would be able to accommodate any version and relatable to any version anyway. So things like the management points, software updates, ADR rules not working. So there's a good general base of trying to cover every single popular method of using SCCM in terms of its usage, but you can use both of them at the same time as well. I just think that perhaps my management pack will give you more of a clearer understanding of what's actually wrong, but the older version of SCCM's management pack can actually sort of cover a wide spectrum to at least where it can actually tell you that something's in a critical state. So you can either use both or you can use one.
Okay, it makes sense. Thank you very much. And then the final, well, it's not really a question, more a point. Is that SCCM is no longer called SCCM, it's called MECM now, Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Management. So just a point for everybody there, including us. And just to sort of elaborate on that. So I know that to be true, but the reality is people still type SCCM into Google because they're used to the last 15 years of calling it, SCCM. So you are correct, but that's why.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think that the thing is, I think there's a lot of things around the actual names of SCCM, because even I sort of get caught up getting called the older versions as well. But the thing is, the console would have it under a folder called Microsoft Endpoint Manager. The console's called Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager. Then Intune and SCCM are then both called Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So there's a lot of there's a lot of things around sort of the namings of it as well, but everyone still calls it the older version. There's even some people that still even call it SMS. So
Really,
yeah,
still.
yeah, there's
Mm,
some. There's some. There's not a lot, but there's probably more people that say SCCM just like me.
mm.
Because I will say endpoint manager, but then I'll hear SCCM, and then it's just then it's very difficult to get sort of the namings to actually stick around across everyone.
Yeah, it's always difficult when something changes name, especially if you were, brought up with the old name. It's a valid point, though. It's an entirely
Yeah.
valid point. And I suspect we'll probably also find like traces of old product names in the product as we do with SCOM. So there we go. I'll just see if there are any final questions, and while I check if there are, please put them in the chat. There's one final question which is not directly related to the MP, and this one is, I'm fairly new to SCOM and I wanted to know where I should start. I've installed the PowerShell MP and I'm working through how to get it working. So presumably, if your question that was from Freddie is in relation to getting started with SCOM in general, I would say, have a look at what your organization is deployed, specifically focusing on, on-prem and infrastructure technologies to start to monitor those things. Then the next stage would be tuning. So you're not just alerting on everything that comes in the management pack. Have a look at EasyTune from Cookdown, which is the company I work for, in the spirit of full transparency, to make that tuning process easier, because you'll end up putting off people if you're sending them alerts for everything under the sun. You want to be sending people actionable alerts only. Then you'll want to look at things like dashboarding to make use of all the core performance data. Have a look at Squared Up for that. Again, I'm mildly biased in that case. I have affiliation to Squared Up as well. But genuinely, these products exist from vendors because they are solving pain points for SCOM. So those would probably be the good starting points, and then tricks and tips, places to look. Start with obviously SCOMathon. There's loads and loads of video content on SCOMathon and blogs as well, covering specific issues. There's also a really good Facebook group that if you have a specific question on, I have this particular problem, there are loads of experts out there from the community, probably yourself included, Dion, that will be able to point you in the right direction. There are loads of kind of great resources out there. And finally, there's of course Kevin Holman's blog. Kevin Holman is he works for Microsoft. He's very well known and is probably the undisputed sort of SCOM expert out there, the authority on it. He's written loads of management packs and blogs covering common things. So the sort of 2-second version, there's a lot to it, but browse what's out there in the community. There are plenty of awesome resources out there to kind of get you started. Let's see, are there any more points, any more questions, any more comments? Let me just check on Slack as well. None that I can see. All right. So all that's left to do now is to give a quick shout out to the companies that make SCOMathon possible. So of course, Protect.org we've mentioned. Thank you, Dion, for you're from Protect.org for speaking with us today and telling us all about Protect.org, who you are and what you do. Then we have Cookdown, which is the company that I work for. We do many things to make the life of the SCOM administrator better. We integrate SCOM with any tool you might want to integrate it with, whether we're talking about raising alerts in SCOM or getting those alerts out of SCOM and making them do more by pushing them into ITSM tools and messaging platforms and the like. And then we finally have Squared Up. Squared Up are the not-so-secret source for SCOM success, providing an awesome visual layer to all of that data that exists inside of SCOM, bringing data from other sources together as well. So it's really clear to see what SCOM is doing and the value that it is providing. And all that's left to do now is to say thank you. Dion, thank you for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure as always.
Thank you for having me.
No, always. And thank you to everyone who is watching, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the video version of this. I hope this has been as useful for you as it has been entertaining and fun for me to do. Until next time, next month, at the end of next month, we'll be joined by Bob Cornelissen from TopCore. He's going to talk to us about upgrading and SCOM 2022 in particular, which is a very hot topic right now. Registration for that should be open next week. And of course, at scomathon.com/hackerscom, we have everything on the next big SCOMathon event. So HackerScom, we're just kind of getting started with right now. HackerScom is a hackathon, but for SCOM, where we pit contestants against each other to build awesome SCOM solutions suggested by you, the community. So when you register, please do provide suggestions of what you are looking for us and our contestants to build. So that is everything I have to say. Thank you very much for joining, and until next time, thank you.